Rose Boone held the revolver with both hands, barrel aimed at the stranger's chest, her pulse hammering so hard she could taste copper. The man in the doorway raised his palms slowly, storm light cutting through the space between them, his worn hat dripping rainwater onto her threshold. His voice came low and careful. "I am not here to hurt you, ma'am." She did not lower the gun. "You are on my land. You are in my house. Start talking, or start walking." He shifted his weight, favoring his left leg, mud caked on his boots. "My name is Emmett Cooper. I work security for the Central Pacific Line. I am investigating land fraud in Sunset Gulch, and your name came up in every conversation I had in town." Rose's throat tightened. She had known this moment would come eventually, had rehearsed a dozen responses in the small hours when sleep would not take her. But none of those rehearsals had included a railroad guard standing in her doorway with tired eyes and a voice that sounded more resigned than hostile. She kept the revolver steady. "I do not know what you heard, but Moonstone Ranch is mine. I have the claim filed in my name. I have been working this land for 2 years." Emmett Cooper lowered his hands an inch, his gaze steady. "I am not questioning your work, ma'am. I am questioning who sold you the claim and whether the sale was legitimate. 3 other ranchers in this territory have lost their land in the past 6 months because their deeds were forged. The railroad is pushing west, and someone is clearing a path by any means necessary." Rose felt the weight of the gun pulling at her wrists. She had bought the claim from a land agent named Horace Pruitt, a man with a smooth smile and paperwork that looked official enough to fool a desperate widow with a small inheritance and nowhere else to go. She had not asked enough questions. She had needed the land too badly. She lowered the revolver slowly, her voice brittle. "If my claim is forged, then I have nothing. I have put every dollar and every daylight hour into this ranch. I have cattle, chickens, a vegetable plot, and a roof that does not leak anymore. I will not walk away because someone in an office decides my signature is not good enough." Emmett stepped inside, closing the door behind him to shut out the rain. He pulled off his hat, water pooling on the floorboards. "I am not asking you to walk away. I am asking you to help me find Horace Pruitt and the men behind him. If we can prove the fraud, we can protect your claim and stop them from taking anyone else's land." Rose set the revolver on the narrow table beside her, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Why would you help me?" "The railroad benefits from clearing land. You work for them." Emmett's jaw tightened. "I work security. I protect shipments and track bandits. I do not protect land thieves. The company hired me to investigate because they are losing contracts over accusations of corruption, and they want to prove they are not involved. If I find evidence that railroad officials are part of this scheme, I will turn them in too." She studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden cost. His eyes were gray and direct, shadowed by exhaustion and something that looked like old grief. He had a scar along his jawline, faint but visible, and his hands bore calluses that matched her own. Rose pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "If I help you, and we fail, I lose everything. If I do nothing, I lose everything anyway. Those are not good odds." Emmett set his hat on the table beside her revolver. "They are the only odds we have. Horace Pruitt left Sunset Gulch 3 weeks ago, but he is still in the territory. A witness saw him in Silver Ridge, 2 days' ride north. If we move fast, we can catch him before he disappears completely. Rose turned toward the small iron stove in the corner, where a kettle sat cold and unused. She had planned to spend the evening mending fences and checking the cattle before the storm hit. Now she was standing in her kitchen with a stranger who claimed to be her only chance at keeping the life she had built from nothing. She faced him again. "I cannot leave the ranch unattended. I have livestock and no hired hands." Emmett leaned against the doorframe, his limp more visible now. "I can help with that. I have experience with cattle and horses. We can take turns. One of us rides to Silver Ridge while the other stays here and keeps the ranch running. Or we both go and hire someone trustworthy to watch the place for a few days." Rose shook her head. "I do not have money to hire help. Every cent I have is tied up in feed and repairs." "Then we take turns." Emmett straightened, wincing slightly. "I will stay here tonight and help with morning chores. You ride to Silver Ridge tomorrow and see if you can pick up Pruitt's trail. I will follow the next day after I make sure your stock is secure." Rose felt the absurdity of the situation settle over her like a wet blanket. She was considering a partnership with a man she had held at gunpoint 5 minutes ago. A man whose employer might be the very source of her troubles. A man whose presence in her house would draw gossip from every corner of Sunset Gulch. But she had no other options. She had no allies in town, no family to call on, and no legal expertise to fight a fraud case alone. If Emmett Cooper was lying, she would find out soon enough. If he was telling the truth, he might be the only reason she kept her land. She met his gaze. "One night, you sleep in the barn, you help with morning chores, and then I ride north while you stay here. If you steal anything or harm my livestock, I will hunt you down myself." Emmett's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Understood. Rose crossed to the stove and lit the kindling, her movements automatic. The ranch house was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, built by the previous owner who had abandoned it after a bad winter. She had patched the roof, replaced the broken windows, and scrubbed the floors until her knuckles bled. She had learned to shoot, to brand cattle, to deliver a calf in the middle of the night when the mother could not manage alone. She had survived public humiliation in her previous life, a scandal in a distant town that had stripped her of her reputation and her husband's family's support after his death. She had come west to disappear, to rebuild in a place where no one knew her story. Now her new life was built on a forged claim, and the man in her kitchen was either her salvation or the final blow. Emmett moved toward the door. "I will get my gear from my horse and settle in the barn. If you need anything tonight, just call out." Rose did not answer. She watched him leave, his silhouette disappearing into the storm, and then she locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her breath coming fast and shallow. She had held a gun on a man today. She had made a deal with a stranger. She had admitted, if only by silence, that her claim might be worthless. Tomorrow she would ride to Silver Ridge and track a man who had sold her a lie. Tomorrow she would step further into danger than she had ever gone, because staying still meant losing everything she had fought to build. She pulled the revolver from the table and checked the cylinder, then set it beside her bed. She did not sleep much that night, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of Emmett moving in the barn, wondering if she had just made the worst decision of her life, or the only one that mattered. Morning came cold and gray, the storm blown out, but the ground churned to mud. Rose dressed quickly, braided her hair tight, and pulled on her work apron before stepping outside. The chickens needed feeding. The cattle needed checking. And she had a long ride ahead. Emmett was already at the fence line, hammering a loose board back into place. He had changed into a dry shirt. His jacket hung over the barn door, and his hat sat low against the weak sunlight. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable. "Your north pasture fence has 3 more weak spots. I can fix them this morning before you leave." Rose nodded, setting down the feed bucket. "I will handle the chickens and check the cattle. There is bread and bacon in the house if you are hungry." Emmett returned to the fence without comment, and Rose moved through her morning routine with mechanical efficiency. The chickens scattered and regrouped around her boots. The cattle were calm, clustered near the water trough. Everything looked normal, stable, hers. She saddled her horse, a sturdy bay mare named Clover, and loaded saddlebags with supplies for 2 days. Emmett walked over as she tightened the cinch, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Silver Ridge is rough. Stay out of the saloons after dark. And do not trust anyone who offers to help you find Pruitt too easily. He has friends in that town." Rose swung into the saddle, her skirt bunched awkwardly around her legs. "I have dealt with rough towns before." Emmett stepped closer, his voice dropping. "If you find him, do not confront him alone. Get word to me, and I will ride up to meet you. We need him alive and talking, not spooked or dead." Rose gathered the reins. "You are assuming I will find him." Emmett's tired eyes held hers. "You will. You are the kind of person who does not stop until the job is done. I can see it in the way you run this place." The unexpected compliment caught her off guard, a small knot loosening in her chest. She nodded once and turned Clover toward the north road, the mare's hooves squelching in the mud. The ride to Silver Ridge took a full day and part of the next morning. Rose stopped only to rest the horse and eat cold biscuits from her saddlebag. The landscape shifted from open prairie to rocky hills, the road rougher and less traveled. She passed 2 freight wagons and a family in a covered wagon. But no one stopped to talk. Silver Ridge sat in a narrow valley, a town half the size of Sunset Gulch, built around a silver mine that had played out years ago. Now it survived on passing trade, desperation, and the kind of business that thrived in places where the law was thin. Rose rode down the main street slowly, scanning the buildings. A general store, a boarding house, 2 saloons, a livery stable, and a row of smaller structures that could have been anything. She dismounted at the livery and paid for a stall, then walked to the boarding house with her saddlebag over her shoulder. The clerk at the desk was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and suspicious. Rose paid for one night and asked carefully if anyone had seen a man named Horace Pruitt in town recently. The woman's expression closed. "I do not keep track of guests' business." Rose set an extra coin on the desk. "I am not looking to cause trouble. I just need to know if he is still here." The clerk took the coin and leaned forward. He was here. He left 2 days ago with a man named Cyrus Webb. They were headed west toward the rail line, talking loud about contracts and land parcels. If you are smart, you will let them go. Rose's pulse quickened. "Do you know where they were staying?" The woman shook her head. "They did not stay here. Try the old mining office at the edge of town. Cyrus has been using it as a base for his operations." Rose thanked her and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, a cramped space with a single bed and a wash basin. She dropped her saddlebag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Cyrus Webb. She had heard that name in Sunset Gulch, whispered in the general store and the post office. He was a land agent with connections to the railroad, a man who bought low and sold high, who appeared wherever disputes erupted over property lines and ownership. If he was working with Horace Pruitt, then the fraud was bigger than Rose had imagined. She needed to get word to Emmett, but she also needed to confirm that Pruitt and Webb had actually left Silver Ridge. If they were still in town, she might be able to follow them and gather evidence before they disappeared again. Rose changed into a plain gray dress, less conspicuous than her work clothes, and pinned her braid into a coil at the nape of her neck. She left the boarding house and walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and abandoned mine shafts. The old mining office was a sagging structure with broken windows and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. Rose approached cautiously, watching for movement. The door was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was a mess. Papers scattered across the floor, an overturned table, chairs kicked aside. Someone had left in a hurry, or someone had searched the place after they left. Rose knelt and gathered a handful of papers. Most were receipts and invoices, but one caught her eye, a ledger page listing land parcels in Sunset Gulch, each marked with a name and a notation. Her name was there, third from the top, with a note in the margin that read claim transferred. Payment received. File closed. Her stomach turned. This was evidence, proof that her sale had been part of a coordinated scheme. But it was also proof that she might not be able to keep her land, even if she exposed the fraud. She folded the ledger page and tucked it into her dress pocket, then searched the rest of the room for anything else useful. She found a torn envelope with a return address in Cheyenne and a receipt for a stagecoach ticket dated 3 days ago. They had left Silver Ridge. They were traveling west, likely to meet someone higher up the chain, someone with the authority to finalize the land transfers and push the railroad expansion forward. Rose stood and brushed dust from her skirt, her mind working through the options. She could ride back to Sunset Gulch and show Emmett the evidence, or she could follow the trail west and try to intercept Pruitt and Webb before they reached their destination. The second option was reckless. She had no backup, no legal authority, and no guarantee that she could handle 2 men if they turned violent. But the first option meant losing time, and time was the one thing she could not afford to waste. She left the mining office and walked back toward the boarding house, her decision forming with each step. She would send a telegram to Emmett from the Silver Ridge post office, telling him what she had found and where she was headed. Then she would follow the trail west, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to track their movements. The post office was a cramped room at the back of the general store. Rose paid for the telegram and dictated the message carefully. Found evidence. Pruitt and Webb headed west to rail line, following at distance. Meet me at Junction Station 3 days from now. The clerk sent the message without comment, and Rose left the store feeling both lighter and heavier. She had taken the next step. She had committed to the chase. Now, she had to survive it. She retrieved Clover from the livery and rode west, following the main road toward the rail junction, where the Central Pacific Line curved south through the mountains. The landscape grew rougher, the road narrower, the settlements fewer. She passed a stagecoach, heading east, the driver tipping his hat without slowing. She camped that night in a dry wash, her bedroll spread on hard ground. her revolver within reach. The next morning she woke to the sound of hoofbeats. 2 riders passed on the road above her camp, their voices carrying in the still air. She could not make out the words, but the tone was sharp, argumentative. Rose saddled Clover quickly and climbed out of the wash, keeping to the brush beside the road. The riders were a quarter-mile ahead, moving at a steady pace. One wore a brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The other was smaller, leaner, with a dark vest and no hat. She followed them for 3 hours, staying far enough back to avoid suspicion. They stopped once at a creek to water their horses, and Rose dismounted and waited, hidden behind a stand of cottonwoods. When the riders moved on, Rose remounted and continued the pursuit. By mid-afternoon, the rail junction came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings, a water tower, a long stretch of track cutting through the valley. Freight cars sat idle on a siding, and a passenger train was loading for departure. The 2 riders dismounted at a small station house and went inside. Rose tied Clover at the edge of the settlement and approached on foot, staying close to the buildings. She found a window at the side of the station house and peered inside. Horace Pruitt stood at a desk, his back to the window, gesturing emphatically. Cyrus Webb sat in a chair nearby, arms crossed, his expression cold. A third man, older and better dressed, stood behind the desk with a ledger open in front of him. Rose could not hear the conversation clearly, but she caught fragments. Contracts finalized, payment pending, one problem remaining. The older man tapped the ledger. The Boone woman is still on the property. If she files a legal challenge, the whole arrangement falls apart. We need her gone before the railroad survey reaches that section. Pruitt shrugged. She is a widow, with no family and no legal representation. A little pressure will convince her to leave. If not, there are other methods. Rose's blood ran cold. They were planning to force her off the land, one way or another. And they were confident she had no way to fight back. She stepped away from the window, her mind racing. She had the evidence. She had heard their plan. But she was alone, outnumbered, and still 2 days away from Emmett's arrival at the junction. She needed to get inside that station house and find the full ledger, the document that would tie all the fraudulent claims together and prove the conspiracy. But she also needed to stay alive long enough to use it. Rose circled to the back of the station house, where a narrow door stood slightly ajar. She eased it open and slipped inside, finding herself in a storage room filled with crates and barrels. The voices from the main office were clearer now, filtering through the thin walls. Cyrus Webb spoke, his tone flat. The railroad is getting impatient. They want the land cleared by the end of the month. If we cannot deliver, they will find someone who can. The older man sighed. Then, we move faster. Pruitt, you ride back to Sunset Gulch tomorrow and handle the Boone situation personally. Webb, you finalize the contracts with the other parcels. I will manage the railroad officials. Rose froze. The footsteps were moving toward the storage room. She looked around frantically, spotting a gap between 2 stacks of crates. She squeezed into the space just as the door opened. Horace Pruitt entered, scanning the room with narrowed eyes. He moved slowly, methodically, checking behind barrels and crates. Rose held her breath, pressed flat against the wall, her hand gripping the revolver inside her pocket. Pruitt stopped inches from her hiding spot, his shadow falling across the crates. Then Cyrus Webb called from the main office. "Pruitt, we are leaving. Get your gear." Pruitt hesitated, then turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Rose waited until she heard the outer door slam before she moved. She slipped out of the storage room and into the main office, her pulse hammering. The ledger sat open on the desk, filled with names, parcels, payments, and notations. Rose pulled the folded paper from her pocket and compared it to the ledger entries. Everything matched. This was the master record, the document that proved the entire scheme. She tore out the relevant pages, folded them carefully, and tucked them inside her dress. Then, she left the station house through the back door and ran toward the edge of the settlement, her boots kicking up dust. Clover waited where she had left her, ears pricked forward. Rose mounted quickly and turned the mare toward the road, her breath coming fast. She had the evidence. She had heard their plan. Now, she needed to get to Emmett before Pruitt reached Sunset Gulch and made good on his threat. She rode hard for the rest of the afternoon, pushing Clover to the edge of the mare's endurance. By nightfall, she was back on the main road, her body aching and her mind spinning with the weight of what she had discovered. She camped that night in a grove of pines, too exhausted to build a fire. She ate dried beef and hardtack, drank from her canteen, and lay down with her revolver beside her. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sound of distant coyotes and the rustle of wind through the trees. Morning brought a rider on the road below her camp. Rose sat up, reaching for her gun, then relaxed when she recognized the silhouette. Emmett Cooper rode toward her, his horse lathered and his face shadowed with stubble. He dismounted and climbed up to her camp, his expression tight with worry. "I got your telegram. I left the ranch in the hands of a neighbor and rode straight through. Are you hurt?" Rose stood, brushing pine needles from her skirt. "I am fine. I found the evidence. Pruitt and Webb are working with a railroad official to clear land through fraud. They are planning to force me off Moonstone Ranch by the end of the month." Emmett took the folded ledger pages she handed him and scanned them quickly, his jaw tightening. "This is everything we need. We can take this to a federal marshal and shut down the entire operation." Rose shook her head. "Pruitt is riding back to Sunset Gulch today. If we do not stop him first, he will burn me out or worse. We need to get there before he does." Emmett looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "Then we ride together. No more splitting up." They saddled their horses and set off at a fast pace, the miles falling away beneath them. The landscape blurred past, familiar and foreign at once. The road winding through hills and valleys Rose had traveled a dozen times before. They spoke little during the ride, saving their breath for the hard pace. But Rose felt the shift between them, the unspoken trust that had formed through shared danger and shared purpose. Emmett had kept his word. He had stayed at the ranch, protected her livestock, and ridden through the night to meet her. He had not questioned her decisions or tried to take control. He had treated her as an equal, a partner, someone capable of making her own choices. It was a new experience, and it settled into her chest like a warm stone. They reached Sunset Gulch in the late afternoon, the sun low and golden over the western hills. Rose led the way to Moonstone Ranch, her heart pounding as the familiar buildings came into view. Everything looked normal. The cattle grazed peacefully. The chickens scratched in the yard. The fence line Emmett had repaired stood straight and sturdy. But then, Rose saw the horse tied at the porch rail, and her stomach dropped. Horace Pruitt stood on her front porch, his hand raised to knock on the door. Rose dismounted and strode across the yard, her voice ringing out. "Pruitt!" He turned, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation. "Rose, I was just coming to discuss your property situation. I think we can reach an agreement that benefits both of us." Rose stopped 10 feet away, her hand resting on the revolver at her waist. "I know what you did. I have the ledger pages that prove you sold me a forged claim. I have evidence that ties you to Cyrus Webb and a railroad official. I am taking it to the federal marshal in Cheyenne, and you are going to face charges for fraud." Pruitt's smile faded. "You do not want to do that, Rose. You will lose the ranch either way. If you fight this, you will end up with nothing, and a legal battle that drags on for years. If you walk away now, I can arrange a cash settlement that will let you start fresh somewhere else." Emmett stepped forward, his voice low and hard. "She is not walking away, and neither are you. We have enough evidence to put you in prison and expose everyone you are working with. The only question is whether you cooperate or make this harder on yourself." Pruitt's hand drifted toward his coat, and Rose drew her revolver in one smooth motion. The barrel trained on his chest. "Do not." Pruitt froze, his face pale. "You are making a mistake." Rose shook her head. "The mistake was yours. You thought I was desperate enough to ignore the fraud. You thought I had no one to turn to and no way to fight back. You were wrong." Emmett moved to Pruitt's side and pulled a rope from his saddlebag. He bound Pruitt's wrists with efficient, practiced movements, then led him off the porch and tied him to the hitching post. Pruitt did not resist, his bravado crumbling in the face of the evidence and the gun. Rose lowered her revolver, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. Emmett returned to her side, his expression softening. "You did it. You tracked him down, gathered the evidence, and faced him on your own land. Most people would have run." Rose looked at him, the exhaustion and fear of the past days catching up to her all at once. "I could not run. This is my home. I built it from nothing, and I will not let anyone take it from me." Emmett's gaze held hers, and something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "I know what that feels like. I lost my family's ranch years ago to a bank foreclosure. I have been drifting ever since, working security jobs and telling myself it did not matter. But watching you fight for this place, I remembered what it feels like to care about something more than just getting by." Rose felt the knot in her chest loosen, replaced by a different kind of tension. One that had been building since the moment Emmett had stepped into her doorway, with his hands raised and his voice steady. She had not expected to trust him. She had not expected to rely on him. And she had not expected to feel this pull, this quiet recognition that he understood her in ways no one else had. She reached out and touched his arm, her voice soft. "Thank you for staying, for riding through the night, for believing me when no one else would." Emmett covered her hand with his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I did not just believe you. I believe in you. You are the strongest person I have met, and if you will let me, I would like to stay and help you rebuild this ranch the right way, with a legitimate claim and no more threats." Rose's breath caught. "You want to stay?" Emmett nodded. I have nowhere else I need to be. And I think I could build something here. If you are willing to have a partner who knows his way around cattle and fences and trouble. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. I would like that. They stood there in the fading light, the weight of the past days lifting slowly, replaced by the tentative promise of something new. Then, Emmett released her hand and stepped back, his expression turning practical. We need to get Pruitt to the sheriff and send word to the federal marshal. The sooner we file the evidence, the sooner we can secure your claim and start building a case against Webb and the railroad official. Rose nodded, pulling herself back to the present. The nearest sheriff is in Red Creek, half a day's ride south. We can leave at first light. Emmett glanced at Pruitt, still tied to the hitching post and glaring at them both. I will keep watch tonight. You get some rest. You have been riding hard for days, and you need to recover. Rose wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy blanket. She nodded and walked toward the house, pausing at the threshold. Emmett. He looked up. I am glad you came to my door that day. Emmett's mouth curved into a small, tired smile. So am I. Rose went inside and collapsed onto her bed, still fully dressed, her revolver within reach. She fell asleep to the sound of Emmett moving around the yard, checking the stock and settling the horses, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of the past week. Morning came bright and clear. Rose woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and she found Emmett at the stove, cooking breakfast with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. They ate quickly, then saddled the horses and loaded Pruitt onto his mount. The ride to Red Creek was uneventful, the road familiar and well-traveled. They reached the town by mid-afternoon and found the sheriff's office at the center of the dusty main street. The sheriff was a grizzled man in his 50s, skeptical but willing to listen. Rose laid out the evidence, the ledger pages, the receipts, the names and dates that tied Pruitt to Webb and the railroad conspiracy. Emmett added his testimony as a railroad investigator, lending credibility to the case. The sheriff arrested Pruitt on the spot and promised to send a telegram to the federal marshal in Cheyenne. It is going to take weeks to untangle this mess, he warned. But if your evidence holds up, you will get your land clear and free, and these men will see the inside of a prison. Rose thanked him and left the office, her shoulders lighter than they had been in months. Emmett walked beside her, his hand brushing hers as they reached their horses. What now? He asked. Rose looked at him, the man who had appeared at her door like a storm and stayed to help her weather it. Now, we go home. We fix the fences, check the cattle, and start planning for next season. And we do it together. Emmett's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. Together, sounds good. They rode back to Moonstone Ranch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The land stretched out before them, wide and wild and full of promise. Over the following weeks, Rose and Emmett fell into a rhythm. They worked the ranch together, repairing fences, tending livestock, and preparing for winter. Emmett proved to be as capable as he had claimed, his hands quick and his mind sharp. He did not try to take over or change the way Rose ran things. Instead, he asked questions, offered suggestions, and deferred to her judgment. Rose found herself relaxing in his presence, the wariness that had defined her interactions with men since her husband's death slowly dissolving. Emmett did not pry into her past, did not demand explanations or confessions. He simply worked beside her, steady, and reliable, and let her trust grow at its own pace. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day, Emmett broke the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" Rose looked at him, the lantern light casting shadows across his face. "Of course. What brought you west? You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. But I have been wondering." Rose took a slow breath, weighing her words. "After my husband died, his family blamed me for his debts and his failures. They spread rumors that I had been unfaithful, that I had driven him to recklessness. None of it was true, but the scandal ruined my reputation. I could not stay in that town, could not walk down the street without people whispering. So I took what little money I had left and came west to start over." Emmett was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry. You did not deserve that." Rose shrugged, the old pain dulled by distance and time. "It taught me to rely on myself. And it brought me here, to this ranch, to this life. I would not trade that, even if the path was hard." Emmett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I lost my family's ranch because I was young and stupid and thought I could out-gamble the bank's interest rates. I borrowed money I could not pay back, made promises I could not keep, and when it all came crashing down, I lost everything. My parents died soon after, and I have been carrying that guilt ever since. Working security, drifting from job to job, telling myself it did not matter because I did not deserve a home anymore." Rose reached over and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "You deserve a home. You deserve to build something that matters. And you are doing that here, with me." Emmett looked at her, his eyes bright in the lantern light. "I want to stay, Rose. Not just as a hired hand or a partner in this ranch, but as someone who belongs here with you. I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I feel more at home here than I have felt anywhere in years." Rose felt her heart swell, the walls she had built around herself crumbling under the weight of his honesty. "I want you to stay. I want to build this life with you. Not just the ranch, but everything that comes with it. I have been afraid to let anyone close, afraid of being hurt again. But you have shown me that trust does not have to be a weakness." Emmett leaned closer, his hand tightening around hers. "It is not a weakness. It is the bravest thing you can do." They sat there together as the stars came out, the night settling around them like a blanket. And when Emmett finally leaned in and kissed her, slow and careful and full of promise, Rose kissed him back, her fear replaced by a fierce, quiet joy. The weeks turned into months, and the federal marshal's investigation moved forward. Cyrus Webb and the railroad official were arrested, and the fraudulent land claims were invalidated. Rose's claim was secured with a new legitimate deed, signed and filed with the territorial office. The ranch was hers, free and clear, and Emmett's name was added as a co-owner. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, with a simple dinner and a bottle of whiskey Emmett had saved for the occasion. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts, the cattle herd growing, the fences strong, the fields fertile. But their happiness was tested one last time, on a cold Sunday morning in late autumn. Rose and Emmett rode into Sunset Gulch for supplies and church services, something they had started doing together as a way to integrate into the community. The townspeople had been wary at first, gossip swirling about the widow and the railroad guard. But Rose's reputation as a capable rancher and Emmett's steady, respectful demeanor had slowly won them over. They tied their horses outside the small church and walked inside, Rose's hand resting lightly on Emmett's arm. The congregation was small, mostly ranchers and shopkeepers, and they nodded politely as Rose and Emmett found seats near the back. The service began, and Rose let herself relax, the familiar hymns and scripture readings washing over her. But then the door burst open, and a man strode down the aisle, his voice ringing out. "Rose Boone, I am here to speak the truth about your past, the truth you have been hiding from this town." Rose's blood ran cold. The man was Henry Granger, her late husband's cousin, the one who had led the charge to destroy her reputation back east. He stood at the front of the church, his face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "This woman is a fraud. She drove my cousin to his death with her reckless spending and infidelity. She took his money, ruined his name, and then fled west to escape the consequences. She has no business owning land or standing among decent people." The congregation stirred, whispers rising like a wave. Rose felt Emmett tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm, holding him back. She stood, her voice steady and clear. "Henry Granger is lying. I was faithful to my husband, and I managed his household to the best of my ability. He died in debt because of his own choices, not mine. His family spread lies to protect his reputation, and they destroyed mine in the process. I came west to escape that injustice, and I have built a new life here through hard work and honesty. If anyone has questions about my character, they can come to Moonstone Ranch and see for themselves what I have accomplished." Emmett stood beside her, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I know Rose Boone. I have worked alongside her, seen her courage and integrity firsthand. She faced down corrupt land agents, gathered evidence that exposed a conspiracy, and fought to protect her home when most people would have given up. If you want to question her character, you will have to go through me first." The pastor stepped forward, his hands raised. "This is a house of worship, not a courtroom. Henry Granger, if you have legal accusations to make, take them to the sheriff. Otherwise, you will leave this service immediately." Henry hesitated, his bluster fading under the pastor's firm tone and the cold stares of the congregation. Then he turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Rose sank back into the pew, her legs shaking. Emmett sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "You handled that perfectly." Rose leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "I was terrified." Emmett's voice was low and fierce. "You did not show it. You stood up for yourself, and you did not let him take your dignity. That is what matters." The service continued, but Rose barely heard it. When it ended, several townspeople approached her, offering quiet words of support. The shopkeeper's wife squeezed her hand. "We know you, Rose. We know what you have built. Do not let outsiders tear that down." Rose thanked them, her throat tight with emotion. She and Emmett left the church and rode back to Moonstone Ranch in silence, the weight of the confrontation settling over them. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Rose finally spoke. "I thought I had left that life behind. I thought I could start fresh, and no one would ever know." Emmett took her hand. "You did start fresh. You built something real here, something that matters. And now the town knows the truth, not the lies Henry Granger tried to spread. You faced your past today, and you won." Rose looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I could not have done it without you. Emmett pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. You could have, but I am glad you did not have to. They sat together as the stars appeared, the night settling around them with a quiet peace that felt hard-won and precious. Winter came hard and fast, bringing snow and bitter winds that tested the ranch's preparations. Rose and Emmett worked side by side, feeding the livestock, breaking ice on the water troughs, and keeping the fires burning through the long cold nights. On Christmas Eve, Emmett surprised Rose with a small carved wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple silver, with a tiny turquoise stone. It is not fancy, he said, his voice uncertain. But I wanted you to have something that represents what we have built together. I love you, Rose. I want to marry you. Make this partnership official, and spend the rest of my life building something lasting with you. Rose took the ring, her hands trembling. I love you too. Yes, I will marry you. They married in the spring, in the same church where Rose had faced down Henry Granger. The ceremony was small, attended by their neighbors and a few friends from Sunset Gulch. Rose wore a simple white dress, and Emmett wore his best coat, and they exchanged vows under the clear blue sky of a new season. The years that followed were not without challenges. Droughts came and went. Cattle prices fluctuated. Neighbors feuded and reconciled. But Rose and Emmett faced each obstacle together, their partnership deepening with every shared struggle and triumph. They expanded the ranch, added a new barn, and built a larger house with room for the family they hoped to have. Rose became a respected voice in the local Ranchers Association, and Emmett took on occasional security work for the railroad, using his skills to protect shipments and investigate fraud. One evening, 5 years after their wedding, Rose and Emmett sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their daughter, 2 years old and named Clara, played in the yard with a wooden horse Emmett had carved for her. Rose leaned against Emmett's shoulder, her hand resting on her growing belly. We did it. We built something real. Emmett kissed the top of her head. We did. And we are not done yet. Rose smiled, her heart full. No, we are just getting started. They watched Clara chase a butterfly across the yard, her laughter ringing out in the still evening air. The ranch spread out before them, the land they had fought for and earned, the home they had built from nothing. Rose had come west to escape her past, to disappear into a new life where no one knew her story. But she had found something better, a partner who saw her strength and her vulnerability, who stood beside her through danger and scandal, who chose her every day. Emmett had come to Sunset Gulch as a drifter, a man with no roots and no reason to stay. But he had found a home, a purpose, and a love that anchored him more firmly than any land deed ever could. Together, they had turned a forged claim into a legitimate legacy, a forced partnership into a chosen marriage, and a story that began at gunpoint into a lifetime of trust and tenderness. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Emmett tightened his arm around Rose, and she leaned into him, Clara's laughter still echoing across the yard. They had survived the land grab, the public accusations, the winter storms, and the slow, hard work of building a life from scratch. They had faced their wounds, shed their secrets, and chosen each other again and again. And as the night settled over Moonstone Ranch, Rose knew with absolute certainty that this was home. Not because of the land, or the buildings, or the cattle, but because of the man beside her, and the family they had created together. Clara ran back to the porch, her cheeks flushed, and her small hands clutching the wooden horse. "Mama, Papa, look. I made him fly." Emmett scooped her up, settling her on his lap. "That is a very fast horse. Maybe someday you will have a real one." Clara's eyes widened. "Really?" Rose laughed, the sound light and free. "Really. But first you have to learn to take care of the chickens and help with the garden." Clara nodded solemnly, already planning her future, and Rose exchanged a glance with Emmett, both of them smiling at the fierce determination in their daughter's face. The moon rose over the prairie, casting silver light across the land. Inside the house, the stove crackled, and the scent of bread baking filled the air. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new reasons to wake up and keep building. But tonight, on the porch of their ranch, with their daughter between them and the stars overhead, Rose and Emmett held each other close and let the peace of the moment settle deep into their bones. They had fought for this life, bled for it, risked everything to protect it. And now, finally, it was truly theirs. Not just the land or the buildings or the legal claim, but the love and trust and partnership that made it all worthwhile. Rose looked at Emmett, her voice soft. "Thank you for knocking on my door that day." Emmett smiled, his eyes warm. "Thank you for not shooting me." Rose laughed, and Clara giggled, and the sound carried out across the ranch, a testament to the life they had built together, the love they had found in the midst of chaos, and the future they would continue to shape, one day at a time, under the wide western sky.